Brian.
Today, we are learning basketball with Brian McCormick, basketball coach who's coached just about all over the world and all these different levels: CYO, AAU, high school, junior college, college hoops. He's currently a U17 basketball coach out over in Poland. That's where we're talking to him from now. And then it seems like you've coached just about anywhere you can think of: Denmark, Estonia, Ireland, Sweden, directed clinics. I mean, countless countries and continents between Canada, China, Greece, Ghana, Kenya, India, Macedonia, Uganda, and all over the U.S. An author of nearly 30 books on Amazon, maybe more. We've almost lost count here, such as Fake Fundamentals, Blitz Basketball, 21st Century Basketball Practice, 180 Shooter, and he's developed some really cool concepts like the Playmakers 3v3 League, where the goal is to kind of get more in-game reps and create an identity for players to kind of all become playmakers, to all think of the game at a high level and work on their feel and IQ, where it's less tactics and coaching and more just learning on the fly by reading and reacting, and more skill development in the moment by focusing on the skills and conditioning within the game of basketball, instead of practicing a lot of ancillary things that might not actually apply to the game itself. And that gets into your fake fundamentals concept, which I'm really excited to dig into, where all these drills exist. I think you just quoted a Rick Pitino quote where he was talking about, instead of running miles and laps just around campus just to get your laps in and miles in, you're conditioning the players through basketball drills. So it's that basketball specific conditioning to be game ready and work at game speed. I just can't wait to dig in here. But first, how you doing today, Brian?
I'm pretty good. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate you reaching out. Yeah, it was actually a nice sunny day today, so can't complain. I ended up having to cancel practice because of some illness and injuries, but it happens.
It happens. Well, shout out to Poland. I got a little Polish in me. Last name's Kaminsky. Actually had a kibasi for lunch today, just to get them in the right setting for where we're at and what we're about to do here. But I don't even know where to start. I think what I'd like to know first is, could you kind of hit on some of just your experience and kind of your path, your journey in basketball at large, and kind of what you've gone through as a coach, and developing and all these programs and writer, just kind of your philosophy and background in basketball.
Okay, sure. I mean, I started coaching when I was in college. Actually, I started before college, but and coached all the way through college. I started with Special Olympics in college at UCLA. We have actually like a completely student run Special Olympics program, and so I got involved my freshman year, and then my last 2 years there, I was like the program director. I started, my sophomore year of college. I started coaching CYO girls, volleyball and basketball. And then from there, like one of I started playing intramural volleyball just because I was coaching volleyball and I'd never been on a team before. I just like played on the beach and stuff. And so one of the girls that was on the co-ed volleyball team with me, she's like, "Hey, I'm coaching with this AAU program. Like, you should come coach with us. I'll introduce you to the directors and stuff." So then I started coaching AAU. Then I moved to high school. And then when I graduated from college, I moved on and I was like basically a volunteer college assistant for a year, and then like a near volunteer junior college assistant for a year. And then when I was 25, I got hired as a head coach of a women's pro team in Sweden, because in between high school and college, I took a year and I was an exchange student in Sweden. So I was coaching, college teams, and I saw how long it was going to take to become a head coach at the college level. And so I texted, or emailed my old coach in Sweden, because as an exchange student, I just played on like the local team, like second division, with a bunch of other like 19 and 20-year-olds. And so I was like, how do I get a job in Sweden? Kind of a, arrogant American thinking that, these countries need American coaches kind of thing. But when I had been in Sweden, the pro team in my town had an American coach, and then our coach for part of the year was one of the American pro players too. So, it kind of gave me the idea that there were a lot of, Americans coaching over there because that was really my only experience with European basketball. And so I emailed him and he's like, I don't know, just email all the clubs and ask for a job basically. And so that's what I did. And only one team responded, and it was the head coach of that team. And he said that he'd been coaching for a number of years and he thought that the players needed a new voice. And so we went back and forth for like, I don't know, 70 or 80 emails, honestly. And finally I was coaching at a camp down in San Diego and got the final email from him that was like, all right, let's do it. So I went over there and I coached there for a year, and then I came back. I left there again, kind of as an arrogant young coach, thinking, I coached a pro team in Europe, made the playoffs. They had like voting for like an all-star game, and so I was one of the all-star head coaches. So I met like and knew most of the like good young players, that were looking to come to the States. Like one of the girls that was on the team, on the all-star team, she ended up signing with LSU. The best one didn't end up coming over. Another one that I met that actually didn't make the all-star game, she signed at University of Miami. Another one from the all-star game came to a junior college and then played at South Alabama. So I was like, I knew all these girls, and I knew a couple of the coaches that were recruiting, especially the one that went to LSU. And so I was like, man, somebody's going to want to hire me. Like I have these connections to players. I'd coached AAU in Southern California. Like I know some of the AAU players. Like I'm obviously going to be able to come back and get a job. And that didn't happen for a while. So then I went back. I started doing individual training for a while, and so I did that for a few years. And worked with some players that eventually, became good. I have an old DVD out from like 2006, ball handling DVD, and the girl that's in that DVD, I think she was like 11 years old at the time. She went on. She was I think a two-time NAIA All-American, and probably would have been an All-American in her senior year, but she tore her ACL, and so basically missed her senior year. But so work with players like her and other kind of young players, and then eventually made my way back to Europe and then back to the States. And so I've coached, a lot of places, and a bunch of different levels. And I think, my the way that I think, which more or less is what we're getting to, I think, tends to be shaped by my initial experiences. So there are very few, if any, other coaches who kind of started their coaching in Special Olympics, and then like when I was a player in Sweden, when I was an exchange student, I coached a team there, and nobody on the team spoke English, and very few of them even spoke, well, most of them spoke Swedish as their second or third language, because most of them, this was the like mid 90s, so a lot of them were recent refugees from the Balkan War. So I had a bunch of Serbians and Bosnians, Croatians, Syrians. I think one kid was from Iran, one was from China, and one was actually from Poland. And that was my team. We only had like, I think two guys who were actually born in Sweden. The rest of them had immigrated there. And so Swedish wasn't even their first language, and I barely spoke Swedish, and English was like their third language for most of them. So it's just a different experience of trying to coach people who don't speak. You can't really communicate with them verbally. And then Special Olympics, same thing. We had some good athletes, some bad athletes. We had some high functioning, some low functioning. So you just have to figure out different ways of instructing and teaching and developing players, and then and athletes, and then moving on and coaching. Starting coaching with volleyball, a sport that I never even played, other than recreationally or anything like that. Like when I first coached, I didn't even know like the rotations in volleyball and stuff like that. Like I knew like the position names, but I didn't know how all the rotations worked, and basically I didn't even know the rules. volleyball, and so figuring that out. And then, I worked when I was, basically like my last 2 years of college, and then probably the first 2 years after college. I worked as many camps as I could throughout the West Coast. I mean, I skipped like my last week of college and went and worked Kelvin Sampson's camp at the University of Oklahoma. I worked, University of Arizona, Utah, Gonzaga. I went up and down the West Coast basically. So just trying to coach as much as I could, and then I was coaching, AAU teams and the CYO at the same time. So when I applied and when I talked to the guy in Sweden when I was 25 years old about the head coaching job, and I sent my resume, even though it would really only encompassed like 4 years, the list of number of jobs that I had in that 4 years, it looked like I was a lot older than 25. They were very surprised to see me when I stepped off the plane. And I and I was younger than several players, but I looked younger than probably all but one player on my team. So yeah. So anyway, so then I went on, and like I said, I've coaching different languages and coaching different levels from beginners all the way through, more or less professionals. Like on that Swedish team, my backup center was at the time was the most capped player in Swedish national team. So she was 41 years old, and she wasn't the oldest player on my team. So, I've seen a lot of different things and had a lot of different experiences that are somewhat atypical from a more typical coaching development and coaching background. And so I think that's in a lot of ways why I kind of approach the game differently, because I didn't have a kind of the common path that other people have. Like I look at everything from the beginning from the standpoint of most coaches start out and they repeat the things that they were taught as players. That's a normal path. Like, I did this as a player. I was pretty good, so I'm going to do this with the players that I coach. Whereas I look at everything that I did as a player skeptically because I never got as good as I wanted to be. Right? Like I never played at a level that I would have liked to have played at. And so most of that is based on me and various factors, but also like I look at the things and the ways that we are taught, and I question a lot of those things, and that's a lot of where the kind of fake fundamentals comes from and stuff like that. So I think that's a lot of the difference in my thinking is just I wouldn't say I really have a mentor. There's a couple people that I respect a lot who helped me along the way. Like I worked for a guy when I started coaching with the AAU program. First, I worked for a woman named Lauren Kelly, and she's still one of the best coaches that I've ever been around. She quit coaching shortly after, basically, I think when I graduated from college, she quit coaching because she took a job as a vice principal. And then when I came back to the same program after coaching college, I worked for a guy named Jerome Green with Hoop Masters in Los Angeles, and he's one of the ones who really got me focused away from kind of drills and kind of the normal skill development pathway and into like no, like kids need to play games. So I came back from coaching college, and basically the main thing that I did was the individual workouts with point guards, right? And mainly it was working on the point guards shooting, and that was basically more or less all I did with that team as a volunteer. Like I had a full-time job on the side too, so I would go at lunchtime and meet the point guard, and we would work on his shooting basically every day, and then I would come back for practice at night. And the only thing I did in practice was when we did post guard breakdowns, I took the guards, and the head coach and the other assistants took the posts. And so I was used to doing kind of organized drills and form shooting and two ball drills and things like that. Everything pretty linear, building from simple to complex, things like that. And so I came down and I kind of took that same methods with these 8 and 9-year-olds that I was coaching. And Jerome was like, you can't do, like, these guys need to play. Like, they don't understand what they need to do until they play. Like, they're more or less beginners. They have a little bit of experience, but they just need to play more. They need to play more. And so we started that's where I developed some of the games that I still use. And some of the stuff that's throughout Playmakers League curriculum is stuff that I developed with that team just so that I could like teach and develop the things that I wanted to teach and develop while playing games. So one of the games that a lot of people, not as much anymore, but like originally kind of knew me for was I called it 2-on-2 rugby, and that's a game that just came out of I was coaching in Los Angeles. We practice at 6 o'clock at night on the west side of Los Angeles, and there's always traffic, and parents are coming from wherever to pick up their kids and bring them to practice and stuff. And so 6 o'clock was kind of like a floating starting time. And so as soon as we had two players in the gym, we were playing 1-on-1. As soon as we had four players, then we were playing 2-on-2 full court. And most of our practices were in pretty big high school gyms, using all the courts, the side baskets. But we usually had three or four teams practicing at the same time. And so, most of the practice we'd have like a half court assigned to us. But a lot of the other coaches would start practices with static stretching or things like that where they didn't need a full court area. So as soon as I had kids, I was like, all right, let's play. As long as we have this full court, we're just playing full court. Like we're not going to waste this time. Like two players, great, 1-on-1 full court. Four players, all right, 2-on-2 full court. And that's how, and because I was like, all right, 2-on-2 rugby. So basically, rugby, you can't pass the ball forward when you're in the backcourt. So I'm trying to get teams to press or teams to trap, the defensive team to trap because, most of the teams pressed. So we had to get used to handling a trap, making that first pass out. And then once we passed out of a trap, then we wanted to bust out with the dribble. And so really what it ends up being is one pass and then a full court layup, right? But now you've got two players chasing down that guy who's trying to make the layup. And so it's a contested layup, it's a speed layup, and so it's going to hopefully transfer a little bit better than if we were just doing like pregame layup lines, right? So we played that over and over, and that's a way for me to practice, dribbling, passing under pressure, and making layups. But it's within the scope of the game, and we're kind of learning the basics of a game at the same time. And so that's Jerome's kind of the if I had a mentor, I would say it was Jerome, just because he's the one that kind of changed my thinking, towards, a more game centered approach and not waiting. I think a lot of times parents and coaches like, well, we can't play games yet because, this, we haven't mastered this part yet. We haven't mastered this part yet. We haven't mastered this and stuff. And we have to, break things down all the way to their most basic level. And he was kind of the one that got me thinking like, no, we don't have to have mastered everything before we play a game. Like, when I was a child, I went out and played at recess before I ever had a coach. I didn't play organized basketball until fifth grade, right? And so, but we played starting in first grade, we'd play at recess, and really starting in third grade, every day, third to fifth grade or third and fourth grade, we played at recess and lunch every single day, and never had a coach until fifth grade. And somehow we figured out how to play, right? But then, somewhere, in the late 90s, early 2000s, parents got this idea that you have to be good before you actually, play the game. You can't like learn the game by playing, so, I remember when I was doing individual training, I would get calls from, like parents of 6 and 7-year-olds who their child wasn't even signed up for a league yet, but they wanted to work out with me so their the child was good before he signed up for a team, and stuff like that. So the way that we've learned the game, the way that more or less the way that we learn the game and we develop our very initial skills has changed so drastically since I was a child.
Right. And I mean, a ton of interesting stuff there, and especially the 2v2 rugby and just kind of like replacing traditional kind of like you said static layup lines with something that's a little more live game action related that kind of builds experience of like you're never just gonna get a slow layup in a game wide open like that. You're probably gonna have one or two defenders chasing you down to try to get the block. So that's a super interesting kind of like segue into the way that you started doing practices. And backing up a little more, I'd imagine that the language barrier and kind of the physical barrier dealing with different available kind of the players and different ranges of talent at all those different stops also kind of maybe help you develop the way you coach. And I was wondering, um, what did you do when if you couldn't talk to the players? Was there just kind of a segue into setting up schemes or actions or plays that were easy to make simple, quick reads for easy scoring opportunities? And was that the goal?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, a lot of it centered around you have to, change drills. Drills have to be simple and they have to be somewhat intuitive, right? Because if you can't explain, a complicated drill, okay, you go do this, then you do this, then you do this, like because they're not going to necessarily understand the language, and some things that we talked about, it was just a matter of having the patience to allow, translation. So there would be one or two players who spoke the best English. I would basically talk to them. Then they would go and talk in their, native languages to the other players, that were also, from the same country or spoke the same language. And then the other ones, they would try to, whoever spoke the best Swedish out of those guys would take what they got from him and then speak Swedish to the Swedish ones. So, but it's like telephone. So everything's getting lost in translation a little bit
Right.
if it's too complicated. And so basically you just want very simple things. And, I think a lot of, a lot of drills just end up becoming too complicated and take too long to explain. I remember I was watching. I was waiting for an interview in Ireland when I coached there at the NBA, the National Basketball Arena, and I was watching a coach with his team, and like I was just sitting there, and he it just took forever to explain the drill because he was like, "Well, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this," and I'm like, "Man, if it takes longer to explain the drill than to actually do the drill, something's probably wrong." Like everything, should the closer it is to the game, the more intuitive it'll be, and the more it'll make sense, right? The further removed you get from a game, the more you have to actually explain, like, what you're doing because it starts to not make sense. And I know some of my players that went on to, when I was at a junior college, that went on to 4-year schools, like that was one of their um, kind of complaints about the coaches here is like, we do this stuff that just is so unrelated to what we actually do or how you actually play the game. Like it's basically like busy work, Um, and so yeah, so that was one of the big things. I remember, I coached at a camp. Actually, it might have even been the camp that when I found out I got the job in Sweden. I had a girl who was deaf on my team, and coaching her, and then I actually have a boy who's deaf on my team right now. And then I coached a high school team where I had another player who was deaf. And the first time I coached her at the camp, I've, like at first I didn't know she was deaf, right? And so I'm like yelling and yelling. So then I find out she's deaf, and so then I asked her, I'm like, what do I need to do? Like, how do I get you to understand me? And she's like, well, I read lips. I'm like, okay. So it just, but before you have something like that pointed out to you, you don't realize how much time you spend yelling or talking to people who aren't ready to listen to you. And so coaching her really made me like, I don't yell at people who are running away from me anymore. Right. Like I know I'm getting their eyes. Like I'm not yelling a lot, during action and stuff like that. Like I need to see their eyes before I'm talking to them because then I know they're paying attention, right? And then with the player who was deaf, it was vital because that was the only way she was going to hear me. But just that experience changed the way that I, approach or teach to all the players that I coach because, I think a lot of coaches, you're trying to get things moving quickly and people are moving in between and then they're not, paying enough attention to what you're saying. They hear part of it, they hear the part that they want to hear, things like that. And then mistakes happen, and then there becomes, well, you're not ever listening to me. It's like, well, yeah, but you should have known that because I was walking away from you when you were talking to me. Like, I should have told you that I'm not listening to you, and stuff like that. So, just kind of those experiences with the different populations, each one kind of teaches a different thing that then you can relate to coaching, in any kind of population, and ultimately, um, if you're able to communicate in situations where it's harder to communicate, whether that's because of the language barrier or because, an athlete's deaf, or because, with Special Olympics, there's an athlete who's nonverbal, stuff like that. If you're able to communicate and teach things in those situations, it just makes, teaching, or communicating with, a higher level team that much easier, right? Because you have less complications, to deal with. So, I had those experiences when I was young, and it really changed the way that I coach at a very young age. And afforded kind of different learning experiences that not every coach is able to have those experiences. And so I think for a lot of coaches, it takes more experience to kind of learn those lessons, because they haven't coached with as many different populations.
Right, and that leads me to kind of some of your more broader concepts that you've dubbed the fake fundamentals, where you know you like we've already touched on a little bit. You think there's a lot of time wasted with drills that might be teaching individual isolated skills, but they don't necessarily translate to the actual game of basketball in the way that they should. And countless times, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's through the books and work that you've written, you just find example after example of these like sayings or phrases that just might not be true. Like you should never make a jump pass. Well, maybe you created an advantage with your athleticism with a floater or breaking down the defense, and you got a defender to go for the contest on the jump, and then you hit the dump off or a kick out. So where do where does this concept come from? And then could you kind of hit on some of the big main things that you consider to be fake fundamentals, and maybe what you've replaced them with when you're coaching those
Sure.
skills?
Um, Fake fundamentals, actually, I think it originated um, with like a Twitter conversation, um, and I can't remember. I think it was with Sevu Bernard, who works with the Washington. I think he still works with the Washington Mystics. I think it was with him, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was the idea, because I had talked about different things and stuff, and that's kind of where the fake fundamentals, kind of came up with the name, through that kind of discussion. But um, so fake fundamentals are basically, they're things that look like they're teaching important fundamentals, but generally aren't accomplishing the purpose that uh, the coach thinks. There's like a mismatch between what we think we're developing and what we're actually developing. So the three man weave is one of the easiest examples. So I know I've worked with coaches. You have a game, commit too many turnovers. So the response is, okay, next practice we need to work on passing. Okay, let's do the three man. We're going to start practice with a three man weave because we need to work on passing. And okay, how many of our turnovers occurred in because of constraints that are there in the three man weave? So how many of our turnovers were because we were trying to throw on the move to a moving target without dribbling? Just I'm open, he's open, and we basically threw the ball out of bounds, and didn't throw the ball anywhere, near our target. Typically it's very few. It probably happens, maybe once a game, but typically very few. Most turnovers happen because of defense, right? Whether it's I'm being pressured by a defender, okay, even if I beat, let's say I have the dribble and I beat my defender, but my defender is still chasing me, that's still a type of pressure, right? It's different than if my defender is, in front of me and pressuring me side to side. Okay, there are different kinds of pressures and different amounts. But if I'm being chased by that defender, now maybe I'm going faster than I want to go with the dribble, or that I'm comfortable, or that I'm accustomed to dribbling. All right, and now I have to make a quick decision, and a pass off the dribble, and I commit a turnover. I'm not practicing that situation in a three man weave drill, right? Other common turnover on a pass is, I'm looking to pass the ball to my teammate and I don't see the help defender, right? So, one common one that I know I keep harping on with my team, right, is we make a cut. Okay, we come off a screen, we're coming to the top of the key. That's where we want to catch the ball, but the passer is not ready to throw the ball yet. So we stop. Okay, now the passer sees us. We're standing still. The passer throws the ball to us, but the pass receiver's defender, who was late because they got screened, is now there to steal the pass and go in for a dunk. Right? Happens all the time because we see the open player. We know we're a little bit late with the pass, so we rush the pass. Now it's a turnover. Okay, so these are where more turnovers happen. Okay, not just kind of undefended running up and down the court type of passes. So if we're saying that we're going to do the 3-man weave for conditioning purposes, great. If that's what you want to do, like you referenced, my comment today about Rick Pitino, saying that he doesn't, run on the track anymore or run miles and stuff like that. He does everything in drills. I don't know what drills, specifically that he does for his conditioning, but, some people will use 3-man weave drills and similar drills for purely conditioning purposes. If that's what you're going to use a 3-man weave for, it's not what I would do, but I'm not going to say it's wrong. Like, it is a way to get a basketball involved. It probably will increase the player's effort through the conditioning because, let's say you say, okay, we've got to get up and down and make whatever 30 layups in, 3 minutes or whatever, doing the 3-man weave. You're going to get a little bit more intensity than you might get if there was no consequence, or if you just had players, running, miles on the track or something like that, right? So I can see that as a reason to use, but that's not the reason why most people use 3-man weave. Most people use it because they say they're doing a passing drill, right? And to me, it's not teaching anything in passing that most people actually want. There are very few coaches who want their players to catch the ball on the move and then make a pass to another player on the move without taking a dribble. Like, most coaches don't want that. There are certain situations where it is a good pass and coaches do want, off an outlet pass, I'm catching, moving it up the court, and I throw the next pass because I know it's open. So it does happen occasionally. And then the other thing is very few coaches run a fast break where they have their trailer, essentially going to the outside of the person they pass it to, right? Most people, their trailer trails middle of the court, right? Or they trail opposite, okay? So we're teaching things in a 3-man weave. We're developing habits through the 3-man weave that are things we don't really want players to do in games, right? So another example is the zigzag drill, okay? So I went to a high school game one time, a long time ago, right? And dribbler dribbles, the defensive players putting a lot of pressure in the backcourt, doing a good job. He's forcing the offensive player, change directions, turns them once, twice. Now the guy gets into the front court. He's getting, kind of up towards the hash mark in front of the bench, okay? And the defensive player does a good job. He gets all the way in front of him, gets his foot out of bounds, right? The guy changes direction. The offensive player, now he's got a straight line drive, and he goes straight line right to the rim. And the coach sub, get him out. Player comes out, and I was like sitting kind of right behind the bench, so I heard the whole conversation. Coach goes, what are you doing? And he's like, what do you mean? Like, I did what you told me to do. It's like, why would you cut him off here and send him to the middle? He's like, that's what we did yesterday when we were doing the drill. You told me to get my foot out of bounds. And he's like, that was just a drill. I don't want you to do that there. You're not supposed to force the middle. And it's like, well, if you do these drills without context, right? And then some players will take that context and believe that it's the same context as the game, unless you've taught them differently. But so things like that, like you're teaching things that aren't necessarily going to happen in a game, or in some cases like this, create a negative outcome in a game. A lot of players, the typical zigzag, okay, take three dribbles, then change direction, 3 dribbles. So as a defensive player, I'm not actually reading the player in front of me to understand when they're changing directions or how to force them to change directions, because I know after 3 dribbles, they're changing directions. So I'm just basically dancing in front of them from side to side, side to side, side to side, because I know exactly when they're going to change directions. So for me, instead of the 3-man weave, you know, my most popular passing game is keep away. Like we put, depending on the age level of the players, either one offense has, one player advantage or 2-player advantage. Maybe it's even numbers. Maybe it's even, a defensive advantage depending on the level of the players. And essentially it's just keep away, like, because now we're passing against a defensive player, and we're having to find the open player and account for other players trying to rotate and get the steals. That's more or less where turnovers happen. Instead of zigzag drill, we play one-on-one full court every single day of practice. It's the one drill we do every day, and it's live. Like we are playing to score as the offensive player, and defense, you're playing to try to get the steal. Well, mainly we focus on trying to turn the player in the backcourt, but you're trying to stop them, get the steal, turn them, keep them from getting into the key once we get into the front court. And so just by making it live, and with the offense, the goal isn't just to get from baseline to baseline. The goal is to score. That changes where I want to position my body, how I'm going to, I have to then account for, well, am I smaller and quicker? So I'm going to press up a little bit more. Am I bigger and slower? So maybe I give half a step more and make them make a shot over me at the rim. Like I have to start to adjust for my particular strengths and weaknesses and my opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Because in a game, I'm going to play against different players and I'm going to have to figure out, what can I do against this opponent? What do I have to protect against this opponent? And if we're just, kind of going back and forth up and down the court, we're not getting that same kind of thinking when we're doing the drill, because all we have to do is count the dribbles and, okay, third drill, change directions, third dribble, change directions. So like I said, those are two of the easiest ones, to kind of explain and offer, examples of things that I would do instead.
Right. I mean, it makes sense that, it seems like the main premise here is like the goal of the drill matters as much as the drill itself, and like what it's being used for, and lessons that are meant to be taken, because players are like building muscle memory. And if they're practicing one thing over and over again, they're probably going to instinctually go to it or use it, like you mentioned, the next day after practicing a zigzag drill the day before. And so I imagine that the Playmakers 3v3 league that you've worked on and the itinerary for those concepts are all kind of based on some of the things we've talked about as well, where the goal is live game reps and less stale sets, less rehearsed plays that have to be done a very specific way, and more read and reacting, more processing speed, more feeling out the game, trying to build that what's known as basketball IQ in a live basketball game setting, because a lot of actions, even in 5-on-5 settings, still boil down to the creation from a 3v3 type of set or style. In even up to the NBA, where they'll run a horns pick and roll or a double drag pick and roll with 2 screeners on the ball, and everything kind of like falling out of that set.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from beyond the arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.
So, what else led to the Playmakers 3v3 concept, and what really is the goal and idea there?
There were 2 main ideas behind when I started Playmakers. One kind of the financial side or business side, and then one the basketball side. So the first it was, when I was a junior college assistant, barely getting paid. I ran an AAU league. I started an AAU league in Southern California, and I ran that. And so basically, as an assistant coach, I could use the gym for free, so on the weekend. And so I ran the league there, and I got to keep the money that I made from the league. Sounds great, right? So after accounting for everything and going through expenses, which did not include the gym, I looked at it, I was like, man, I spent all my money on referees, right? Spent all my money on referees, and still everybody complained about all the referees. I was like, it's great to be able to run a league, a competitive league, without having to spend so much money on referees, right? And so the idea for Playmakers originally was kind of like, all right, most coaches in the middle of their season, they don't want to be encumbered with running extra practices and stuff like that, right? Like I run my I run my college practice, whether I'm the head coach or assistant coach. I don't want to then have to go run, under 10 practice, and plan it and all those things. So the idea was twofold. It's like, okay, how can we create a league where we don't really need to pay referees, where essentially all the money coming in can go to the coach who's running the league. And then two, create a curriculum so the player or the coaches don't have to think about what they're going to do, right? It's all laid out every day's. They already have their practice plan essentially for every single day. And so that was kind of the two things. Like, okay, if I was, a college assistant again, lowly paid college assistant like that, and I had a gym available that I could make money from, this would be a way where I wouldn't have to think too much, ahead of time. I wouldn't have to plan anything, just getting the kids and everything. But I wouldn't have to pay the referees, and we could run this league. And now I would get to make, the majority of the money for the work that I'm putting in. So that was kind of the one side to it. Then the second side of it was, I started around the time, well, not even around the time people have been complaining about AAU since I was coaching AAU in the, late 90s. So the momentum for AAU is killing basketball, and AAU is everything wrong with basketball, and American kids don't have fundamentals anymore, blah, blah, blah. All that was gaining a lot of momentum around the time that I was developing this league. So I'd already written Crossover, the new model of youth basketball development. And like when I wrote that, it came out in like 2005. People thought it was because I wrote it because of the U.S. losing in 2004. That was just a coincidence. It had nothing to do with it. Was it 2004, 2002? I don't know. Whenever the U.S. lost back then, when I think they lost 3 games at the World Championships. So people thought it was in reaction to that. It had nothing to do with it. I'd started the book before that, and the book initially was intended to be about individual training and just kind of morphed into something else. And so, when I wrote that book, people were kind of like, well, this is great, but it's, somewhat philosophical. We want like more details, like how do we exactly do what you're talking about? And so Playmakers was kind of like that idea of, okay, if you buy into these ideas of long-term athlete development and skill development, game-based learning, things like that, this is, a step-by-step plan to do that within like within a league environment. So as opposed to just running side clinics, in addition to, having kids play on a, AAU team or whatever, the original idea was, Playmakers could be, either a feeder program for a high school team, run by a high school coach, or potentially like an off-season league, or like one of the original leagues. They used it, NJB in Southern California. They used it kind of like for any beginners or newcomers into their league. They would have like a fall Playmakers League as kind of like an introduction to basketball before they got put onto a 5-on-5 team in the winter. So it kind of has been used in different kind of ways by different people. But that's basically the idea is, and then, once I had the original league out for a while, then people were like, well, I'm coaching beginners, and even though this is, pretty basic stuff, like it's probably even too advanced for the beginners. And so that's why now we have 3 levels. We have a beginner level, we have what we call the transition level, which is level 2 now, and then we have the original Playmakers, which is level 3. And so the idea behind the 3 levels now is, ideally a player signs up 7, 8 years old, for their first experience playing basketball, put them in the beginners league. Next year they come back, put them in the transition league. Next year they come back, put them in the Playmakers League. Now they're 10 years old and they're moving on to 5-on-5 basketball. So that's kind of the way the league is designed, is kind of a year-by-year progression. Because what typically happens, and I would say this is one of the criticisms of youth basketball in the United States, is every league is essentially the same. The game is the same. Like, we're trying to get 7 and 8 year olds to play the same way that NBA players do, basically college players, right? The court is slightly smaller than an NBA court, but a lot of I know when I coached under 9 AAU, we played on high school courts, so it's the same size, full court, 10-foot baskets. We were using size 6 balls at least, or women's basketballs, but it's basically, we're out there trying to run pick and rolls and, hey, yeah, skip it to the weak side. And, we're running 1-2-2 presses and, dropping back into 2-3. And, we're doing all these things with young players. And it's like every season's the same. It's like, okay, well, you did all that at 9 years old. Well, what's new at 10 years old? Nothing. It's the same thing. Okay, well, what's new at 11 years old? I don't know. It's the same thing. Well, what's new at 12 years old? No, it's the same thing. What's new at 13? Oh, well, now you get to use a size 7 basketball. Well, what's new at 14? No, it's the same thing. 15, same thing. And it's basically, obviously the ability to do things are different, and you have higher, expectation levels for a varsity high school player than a freshman team high school player, and things like that. But they're basically playing the same game, and there's very little difference. And so this is kind of, our idea is, no, you start small, and we want to maximize the time that every player has a ball in their hands. Because as much as people will tweet out that 95% of the game is played without the ball in your hands, like, the reason why you play basketball is to have the ball in your hands. You don't sign up to play basketball because you want to be the best defensive player, right? You don't sign up to play basketball because you want to stand in the middle of the key in a 2-3 zone. You don't stand in basketball because you want to be the guy standing in the corner hoping that somebody passes it to you so you can knock down a corner 3. Like, nobody signs up for basketball for those reasons. Everybody signs up because they want to shoot the ball, they want to dribble the ball, right? So we want an environment where kids have the ball in their hands as much as possible, right? And so, level 1, they're going to have a ball in their hands almost the whole time. Up level 3, it's a little bit different. Now we're playing a little bit more 3-on-3, but still the touches that you're going to have in a 3-on-3 are far more than you're going to have in a 5-on-5 game. That's one of the things, when I did my PhD, I actually did a study on, it was about physical activity in 3-on-3 games versus 5-on-5 games, because that's what my department, was most interested in from a scientific standpoint. But one of the things that I found, like the ancillary benefit of 3-on-3, is that, every player gets more touches in a 3-on-3 game than a 5-on-5 game in the same amount of time, and the position differences decrease, right? So in a 5-on-5 game, I did my study with freshman high school players, so 14-year-olds, and in a 5-on-5 game, your point guard touches the ball virtually every possession, right? Your best wings are going to touch the ball roughly 50 to 60% of possessions, depending on how much ball movement you have and stuff like that. Your post players are going to touch the ball less than half the time, right? So everybody talks about, well, my post players develop slowly. Post players develop slowly. It must be because they're taller, they're uncoordinated, or whatever. And it's like, well, they don't touch the ball as much, right? Because, this is one thing I wrote about this when I went to a college practice, right? So I went to a Division I college practice, and, you do your guard workouts, your post guard workouts. So guards on one end, guard posts on the other. The guards are over there. Every guard's got a ball in their hand. They're playing one-on-one. Things are contested, things like that. The posts are down here. They've got whatever, let's say 4 posts, and they're taking turns doing the mic and drill. So one guy's got a ball in their hand making layups, and the other 3 are waiting for him to finish. And then they're going to rotate through. And then when they work on post moves, same thing. First player comes out, no defense. Okay, post move, done. All right, next, second player, post move, done. And that's what they did. And that's very common, is guards, the idea is, if in a game you see, your guard make a turnover, or maybe your guard bounces the ball off his foot or whatever, makes a mistake. You don't come into practice and go, okay, you bounced the ball off your foot yesterday. We're going to go back, and all you're going to do today is uncontested stationary dribbling, right? But if a post player misses a layup in a game, immediately they come into practice. They go, okay, take away the defense. All right, post player, you've got to make 20 straight layups, or you do push-ups, right? So we treat guards and posts completely different. Then we go, well, why are the guards developing quicker? I don't understand. It must be because there's something wrong with post players. And it's like, well, look at the practice between the two. And so in 3-on-3 versus 5-on-5, the post players tended not to get as many touches as the point guard still, but it was a much smaller difference between point guards, wings, and posts. So the possessions didn't balance out completely, but the differences narrowed between how many touches each one was getting. And part of my conclusion, which obviously I cannot prove or disprove this, but my thinking was that if I took, because I used an actual team, and so that team had been playing together, and they all kind of had accepted roles. They knew who was supposed to be the point guard, who was supposed to be the shooting guard, who was supposed to be the center, et cetera, et cetera. And so my assumption is, or my guess is, that if you took 12 or 15 strangers and played 3-on-3, there would be almost no difference between positions, because they wouldn't necessarily fit into the positions that they're used to playing with their team, because they're not a team and they don't know each other, so but again, I can't prove that. That's just my guess, is that if you had players who are unfamiliar with each other, there would be even less of a difference between ball touches or ball possessions by position. So anyway, so these are the basic basketball reasons why we promote Playmakers League, and why we think it's kind of a ideal starting point for basketball players is just the idea of each year we're going to do something different, and we're trying to maximize the amount of time that players have with the ball in their hands, because ultimately, again, that is why players play basketball. And at the NBA level, at the college level, at the varsity high school level, of course, yes, players have to learn how to play without the ball. And it's important to have role players and to understand these different things, and to have that guy who can stand in the corner and make the three-pointer, and have, a Rudy Gobert who's, happy to just play defense, and be an expert in drop coverage, and Draymond Green, who makes himself into a media superstar just by, playing good defense. All of these things are very important, but that's not why anybody's playing basketball at 8 or 9 years old. And so, along with kind of the skill development benefits that we see is the biggest thing that we should want out of youth basketball is we want players to continue playing, right? We want to further participation and grow participation, and that comes not because of competitive leagues, or because we're winning games, or because we're giving trophies, or any of these other things. It's because they have fun, and they're engaged, and they're in a positive environment, and they are learning something, and they can see themselves improving. And so these are the things that we focus on in our league, is making sure that everybody's engaged, everybody's having a good time, everybody enjoys basketball, everybody sees themselves improving over the course of the 6, 8, or 10 weeks, depending on the league. And then we put them in different situations, playing against different players, playing with different players. So it's not like I sign up for a team and I get placed on this random team and my team's terrible, and we lose all our games, and that's just the way the league goes. There's nothing you can do about it. Or I sign up for an A, like my friend coached at Parks and Rec down in Los Angeles with his sons. And they go on the first day, they have, tryouts, and everybody picks their teams and whatever. And so then the next day, a coach comes in with a whole team, and they sign up together. And it was the all-star team from the previous year. They all didn't go to tryouts so that they could play as the same team, so they could guarantee that they won the, whatever, Pico Rivera, Parks and Rec League. It's like, what are we doing? Like, what's the point? I even wrote about that. I wrote about it last week, just in terms of blowouts, because my team here, compared to, like, we're a relatively big, professional club, and we play against other clubs who are not, right, that are, don't have the resources that we have, don't attract players in the same way, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of our games are not close. And so in the States, like nothing changes here. We're up by 60 points and nothing changes. We're still pressing, we're still playing hard, we're still trying to do the same things, and nobody cares. Like that, it's just the way things are, right? Whereas in the States, we're shortening the clock, we're running the clock on, dead balls. We're telling teams you're not allowed to play too hard, you're not allowed to press. What was it last week? Some college coach got mad because walk on off the bench took a 3-pointer with, in a 10-point game when the other team, in the States we get offended by these things. But the problem with that is, like, at a youth level is, okay, so you signed up with your all-star team and you're going to beat everybody by 50 points. But once you get ahead by 20, now it's a running clock, right? And you're not allowed to press or do all these things. Well, how are the other teams going to get better if they play less? And they don't get to go against good defense. So here, like I wrote about, the guy who benefited the most from our game was the opposing team's point guard, because we have some pretty good defensive, on-ball defensive players. He got to go up against probably 4 different players during that game, at least, that are probably better than any defender he'll face the rest of the year. Whereas in the States, after the first 7 minutes of the game, we probably wouldn't have been able to press anymore. He would have lost that opportunity to practice against good defense, handle pressure, get his team into offense, and all these things that give him a chance to develop. Like, we focus so much on the score that we lose sense of what we're actually trying to do. Like, youth basketball should not necessarily be about winning and stuff like that. And so the score shouldn't really determine how we're playing. We should want players to play more, not play less. Even though, okay, maybe it makes the game 80 points instead of 60 points, but once you lose by 15 points or more, like, what's the difference? Whether you lose by 40 or you lose by 60, like, you still got killed. Everybody knows you got killed. But if you take something from the game, and I say this as, I've coached 2 high school teams that I don't think won a game. Well, no, like last year, I think we won like 2 games. And then I coached a girls' high school varsity team that didn't win a game all year. And none of them were close. Like, we started the season with 0 players, when I was hired. Like, literally tryouts, nobody came to tryouts. We had to, like, beg people. We were playing a varsity schedule, and we had players who had never played on a basketball team at any level in their entire lives. And now they were signing up, and they had to play varsity because we only had, by the end of the year, we had 11 players. But for our first game, we were only up to 6 players. So they wouldn't let us have a JV team before we had a varsity. We had to play varsity to have a JV, but we only had 6 players. And none of them, one girl had played before, and she was the head cheerleader. So she would go to cheerleading practice. And then if basketball fit in her schedule, then she would come to basketball. And she was our best player. She was our only player with experience. So we have girls who've never played on a team before, and we're just getting, destroyed because we've never played basketball before. But shortening the game, in that case, I didn't have a problem with it because we were literally developing injuries because they were playing too much because they had barely exercised before basketball started, right? But, if we were in shape and everything, like, shortening the game would just give us less opportunity to practice, and once we knew we were going to lose, like, my girls, like, didn't quit. Like, they didn't care. Like, it's like 30 points, 40 points, 50, who cares? Like, we're just going to go keep playing, like, because that's the only way we're going to get better, is to keep playing and to try things. And okay, yeah, they stole the ball from me again. They make the layup. Okay, inbound the ball. Let's try it again. It's just like practice at that point. But we get so offended by seeing, lopsided scores that we forget about, the whole point is we're trying to teach players how to play basketball better, and playing less basketball is not going to help make them better. Sorry for the tangent.
No, I mean, that's what it's all about. It's dig it in. And yeah, I mean, if the goal is development and game reps are the main way to develop and actually facing adversity so you can learn from it, like that point guard that had to play 4 super strong defenders in the one game you were talking about. I mean, that makes it more vital than the actual wins and losses, especially when we're talking like youth basketball. Like, we're not like trying to have the best record in 5th grade basketball. The goal is to develop these guys and girls as people, human beings, and basketball players. and to make them better people and prospects going forward. So, the whole point is to actually develop and not just win games at that level. So, it's right on the money that like people should probably not get as offended if you're getting blown out, you're getting blown out, and that final score isn't really going to matter too much, and no one's going to remember the number as much as, like you said, like you got blown out. Like, so letting players get those reps are valuable, especially like you said, to actually improve. And the Playmakers League itself sounded super interesting. And along with your study, your PhD study, that you're saying that the 3v3 got more touches kind of spread out, even if it wasn't even between the guard, wing, and post. Like it's much more closer to even, much more spread out and shared. So you actually get more reps in the post and for each individual player. And also looking at practice itself, how you should probably have bigs going against other bigs instead of just practicing against a chair or against a no defense at all, when that's just not a realistic game situation. And I could definitely also see how the value in like starting small and working your way up in youth basketball is important in kind of developing goals, reaching those goals, and then actually having new goals the following season and new development ideas, going from like very basic fundamental stuff in early 3v3, the transition level 2 that you mentioned, and then like the final Playmakers League, and then getting to 5-on-5 basketball, instead of just kind of being thrown everything on your table at once, being maybe overwhelmed by some of what you're trying to do, and then just being expected to figure it out in a 5-on-5 setting where you probably won't get too many touches, compared to like building those reps over and over with the ball in your hands, working on the basics first and then expanding it from there. And like the NBA comparison that pops to mind is maybe sending a young player to the G League to get more on-ball reps, like the Orlando Magic did with Jed Howard last season, where they could have let Jed Howard be the 10th or 11th man in the pros, where he's standing in the corner for one catch and shoot triple a game, maybe, and that's his only look for practice, compared to sending him to the G League for 30 games, where he's getting 30 touches a game as the primary option. He's running the offense. He's able to take tougher shots, more reps, more decisions, and get those in-game reps as a primary option, versus just kind of being a standstill shooter that might get one shot a game. And the difference there being like the G League setup literally being more directed for him to get development, and the NBA setup where being at the point where the wins and losses matter, and the team isn't as interested in just developing you at that point. So that pops to mind as kind of like the value of in-game reps with the ball in your hand, compared to just everything being about wins or losses. And like I almost think those two settings are different, and there's different goals along the way as a basketball development path, where practice and game reps are for development, and at a certain point it's more about wins and losses. And I think that might come down to coaches and parents also being more concerned about the wins and losses and than the actual individual development of the player. And so I was also interested in kind of the 180 shooter concept, and what exactly goes into that. Is that a certain way to develop your shooting, or what is that idea?
So I got to plug in my phone. Yeah, I mean, 180 shooter is kind of a outgrowth of. Okay. Like I said, I started out when I first was coaching college. I was basically like the shooting coach for the point guard, and so my original 180 shooter book kind of detailed a lot of more or less what I did with him. So he came to I was at a very non-athletic kind of D3/NAIA school. And So this player came, and when he arrived in the fall of his freshman year, he was basically the fourth string point guard. The head coach was ready to get rid of him, and then in like his first or second week, he broke his wrist. And luckily it was his left wrist. And so while he was out, that was my other job. I was the one that was tasked with driving people to the doctor when they had doctor's appointments and stuff like that. So I got to drive him to the doctor, and as we're driving back, when he's got his cast, he's like, I want to, I can't play, right? So I want to spend this time. I want to dedicate myself to becoming a better shooter, right? And he was he played at a pretty good high school program, but he was probably like the fifth. I'm not even positive he started in high school. He might have been their sixth man, but he was definitely not their first couple options. And he shot, like sub 30% from three, and I think from the field he was sub 40, and he wasn't a good free throw shooter. Like, he just wasn't a good shooter. But he worked every single day. Like I said, we would meet at lunchtime and work on shooting. And so at the beginning, it was basically stationary one-hand form shooting, as he was getting used to having the cast on his wrist and stuff like that. And then built all throughout the year. And then, by the end of the year, like I remember when he first came back, he got the cast off. He wouldn't shoot. He wouldn't shoot 3-pointers yet because we had done so much form shooting that he was only used to or comfortable shooting like kind of a form shot. Like, he wasn't really comfortable using his whole body yet. And then he shot, I think even through the end of the year, if I remember correctly, he really only shot free throws one-handed. Like, he would bring his second hand up, but he would only really have his one hand on the ball. Again, because he had spent so much time shooting without his left hand involved because of the cast. And so, but in the last game, so when he first came back, we had this other kid on the team that we called Hollywood. He was a great practice player, but not as good in the games. But he talked so much trash, and so he would just talk trash because he was one of the other point guards. And so this guy coming back was essentially going to take his minutes. So he was kind of trying to bully the kid, the young freshman and stuff like that. And he would just talk trash. You can't even shoot 3-pointers and all this stuff. So the last game of the season, this kid ends up going for like, I think he had 32 points and a bunch of assists, maybe like 8 assists. I think he shot 15 free throws. He hit like 14 to 15 from the free throw line. And against the team that we played had like the all-league guard was the guy he was matched up against. So anyway, most of my book kind of detailed the work that I did with him. And then I ended up moving back to LA, and he ended up transferring. He ended up becoming a Division III All-American at a different school. And, we grew up, basically 10 minutes from each other. I was obviously older. We didn't know each other until, I showed up to coach and he showed up to play at that school. But, we grew up like 10 minutes from each other. So, in the summertime, I would work with him a little bit and stuff like that. And so a lot of that original book was based on, the things that I did with him, and then moving on from him, and then becoming, kind of an individual trainer and working more or less on shooting with, kind of a number of players during those years. And then I kind of, just formalized what I did into a book. And originally it was, it had an online program attached to it. And then I took the online program down because I was having an app made, and then the guy who was making the app basically disappeared. And then I just didn't bother to try to, once he got halfway done, I had to pay half the money. And so I paid half the money, and then he disappeared. So the app never was completed, and I've never kind of revisited it. But, and now there's plenty of apps out there that you can use that do a lot of the same things that my app was going to do years ago. But anyway, so that's kind of what the 180 shooter, is more or less based on. It's just how I teach shooting, which has evolved. That's why the second book is called The Evolution of 180 Shooter, because that's more how I teach shooting now. And it's a little bit more focused on shooting in groups, because I based most of Evolution of 180 Shooter was based a lot on what I did when I was a junior college coach. Working with, over 3 seasons, we were top 10 in threes made and 3-point percentage and free throw percentage, during that time, and had multiple good shooters. I think one year we had 4 shooters over 40%, and all of them making more than 2 threes a game. And a couple of them started school, not shooting 3-pointers when they got to college. Some of them were very reluctant 3-point shooters when they got there. The girl or the woman who arrived, and I kept calling her a shooter because that's why I recruited her based on, like the one game that I watched of her. And like she told me at one point, so I never really thought of myself as a shooter until I got here. I was like, I don't know, man. I saw you shoot the ball and I thought you were a shooter. That's why I recruited you. So things like that. And she shot 50% from the 3-point line for the season. And she said she'd never thought of herself as a shooter beforehand. So a lot of the evolution of 180 shooter is kind of about that team and how shooting is. There are so many things that are involved in shooting and shooting development that it's not just focused on technique or getting somebody to shoot the right way or all those things that we typically think about when we're thinking about improving shooters. So I write about, and I've written about a couple times. I met a women's player. I didn't really coach, so I moved to a new town, and I was in the gym, and I met this girl, and I was watching her work out and whatever, and started talking to her, and I was like, "What'd you shoot last year from 3?" And she's like, 14%. And I was like, "Man, you shoot a lot better than a 14% shooter," and stuff. And she's like, "Yeah, I want to be a 40% shooter this year." And I was like, "Well, that's quite a big jump to go from 14 to 40%, but yeah, okay." So like I really only kind of interacted with her maybe once or twice, like, and that year, I forget now exactly, but I know she shot like over 36, 37% from 3. She was like in the top 15 in her conference, things like that. So she improved dramatically, 2 times better, whatever, shot more, made more, better percentage, all of that. And, I write about it because she didn't change her shooting at all. She shot the same exact way. She improved because she had a new head coach that year. Head coach was Brianna Finch. She's at Boston University now. She's an associate head coach at Boston University. She should be a Division I head coach, but things happen. So she was her new head coach, and Coach Finch did a better job of creating open shots for her, and she did a better job of taking better shots. Right. So it wasn't so much that she changed how she shot the ball; it was she changed the shots that she attempted. She played, Coach Finch gave her a lot more confidence, encouraged her to shoot, whereas the previous coach had kind of, discouraged her from shooting and, would sub her out if she missed and stuff like that. So she went from, like I said, so she went from 14% to like 37, 38% without changing anything about her actual shooting, just the confidence that she felt, the shots that they got within their offense, the encouragement, from her coach. Yeah, I want you to be a shooter, letting her play through her mistakes, letting her play through her misses, stuff like that. That's how she developed as a shooter. And so that's kind of what the evolution of 180 shooter is about, is that it's more than just technique, that there's a lot of things that go into developing a shooter beyond just what they do physically, whether it's the psychological side, whether it's the, tactics and the shot creation side, whether it's the physical side, getting stronger will help your shooting most of the time. Things like this. There's a lot of different things that are involved in shooting, and to try to attribute, a person's shooting to just one thing, whether that, whatever that one thing is, oftentimes misses a dozen other things that were influential in that player's, whether that's, accounting for their success or whether it's accounting for dips in performance or whatever.
Right. I mean, it sounds like a couple like buzzwords that are always important that come to mind for me, like the situation, the opportunity is not just the talent or individual development. It's simply sometimes just the idea that you take better shots. You're being given better shots. You're creating better shots, or the coach, that your teammates are creating better shots for you. And like you said, the confidence itself and how 3-point percentage isn't always the only indicator of a good shooter or a confident shooter or a shooter that defenses respect. That you like you just said, you can plop the same exact shooter in a better situation with better looks and more confidence, and you get better results. And the production ends up being a result of all those different factors instead of just the form or just the technique development itself. And not to mention, like how today's game has gotten, where your relocation conditioning and your ability to sprint up the floor constant, like
Yeah.
like a Steph Curry constantly working on his just conditioning, running around to different spots on the floor back and forth. I forget the drill exactly, but like going to each spot from perimeter to perimeter, having to make a three, like make 100 threes in 3 minutes or whatever crazy drill that he has to do like that. But actually, putting in the work to stay moving off the ball to get yourself open, if that's what the scheme is involved with, and not just like jacking up tough pull up threes and trying to actually create more open catch and shoot in rhythm threes. And all that goes into being more of a motion or movement shooter, especially nowadays, compared to more standstill shooters that probably existed more often as the game kind of developed.
Right.
And so one last question, and kind of a different question from what we've been talking about. And we talked about Victor Wembanyama once on Twitter, and just kind of what goes into what actually defines a generational prospect, because the word gets thrown around a lot. And I think we both agreed that, like, for me at least, a 7'4" big man that plays like a guard and has an 8-foot wingspan and is showing you that he can not only be a defensive anchor with versatility that can protect the rim and rack up blocks with that length and defensive instincts, but he can hit tough shots. Like he can, no one is Kevin Durant, but he can hit pull up fadeaways with an unblockable shot release that only Kevin Durant has really done before him. And he has the range, the touch to do it from just about anywhere and any angle on the floor. And those are all the indicators to me that, and, it's not like we're breaking news here that he's one of a kind, but just, compared to a lot of prospects that get called that, what did you see that made him so special? And what would you define as, what actually makes a generational basketball prospect like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the argument when people were saying that he wasn't,
And that he was too skinny for the NBA, I
Yeah.
think, was probably one of the big critiques for him and Chet Holmgren before him, as if Kevin Durant isn't relatively skinny compared to a lot of these big bruisers out there, and already a top 10, top 15 player to ever play the game.
And so, yeah, my argument was just entering the draft. He was easily the biggest talent to enter the draft since at least LeBron minimum, if not ever, right? Whereas to me, I always said Luka was the most accomplished player to enter the draft, probably, since Kareem or somebody when college basketball was basically it, and somebody like Kareem or Walton and won 3 or 4 championships and stuff like that, right? With what Luka did with Real Madrid and with Slovenia national team, like he was easily the most accomplished player. But Wembanyama, from a potential standpoint, I mean, what more could you want for the game of basketball from a potential standpoint, right? Like if you're just talking about potential, which at that point he really was, I mean, he was, decently accomplished as a player in France, and he had some EuroLeague experience and stuff like that. So he had played at a high level, but for the most part, he was still mostly untapped potential, right? But if you're talking about potential, like what does he lack that you would want from a potential player? Somebody who has good ball skills, somebody with that kind of length, that kind of size, that kind of movement, without a large, injury history, because that's obviously one of the biggest factors with big guys, is the propensity to be injured, and especially coming the year after Holmgren, who missed his season, like that was, clearly, something that you would expect from taller players, or something that you might fear from taller players, right? But he seemed to have no real significant injury history or any kind of significant, imbalances or anything that would suggest potential for injury that you might see in other taller players. And just in terms of pure potential, like I just can't think of anybody really in the history of the game that you would say has more potential than him, and whether he eventually becomes the best player or not to ever play the game, like to me, doesn't change that, because then we're talking about outcomes, and outcomes are based on a lot of factors, and some within his control, some outside his control, if he doesn't win 5 or 6 championships, he's probably not going to be considered the best player to ever play basketball, right? If he never has a good supporting cast, his likelihood of winning 5 championships are small, so that's something that's outside of his control. But just in terms of pure potential, like I don't know what you would want from a player that he didn't show in terms of his ability to make tough shots. And, people say, well, he shot a low percentage from threes. Like, yeah, but he's a 7'4", 18-year-old. Like, do you really expect him to shoot 40% from the 3-point line? Like, he shows he can make these shots. He shows that he can make tough shots. He shows that he can defend. He shows that he can play and drop. He can switch. He can do all these different things. So, I don't know what else you could possibly see from a prospect to say, oh no, this player has more potential, because, I mean, size is important. If you're 7'4", you have advantages in the game of basketball. Everybody wants, people that can protect the rim, and by and large, the taller you are, the better, within reason, you are at protecting the rim. I mean, there's a reason why players like Rudy Gobert are valuable players, despite not being nearly as good offensively as, other players. They have value strictly because they make it hard for the other team to score. And in a game where the team with the most points wins, there are 2 ways to do that. You score more yourself, or you prevent the other team from scoring, as easily. And so, he has that potential where he shows the glimpses where he's, KD-like on the offensive end, but then, Gobert plus on the defensive end. So it's like, you're talking about multiple-time defensive player of the year, multiple-time MVP, arguably the greatest scorer, in the history of the game. Some people would say, what else do you want? Like that is the definition of potential. Whether or not, he lives up to it or not, like that's the definition of potential. Like there's nothing, I just can't see another player coming along with just a more raw potential at that age, with that height and the ball skills, and having enough high level experience, because you look at somebody like Giannis. When Giannis came over, he was basically had been playing in, the second division in Greece, for at least, up until a year before the draft. Whereas, the full year before Wembanyama was drafted, he was in the EuroLeague. Like he wasn't dominating. He wasn't getting 30 minutes a game, Well, he was playing on a EuroLeague team. Like, that's legitimate high-level basketball. Like, Greek second division is not the same thing as the EuroLeague, or even just playing, in the French, the highest league in France. Like, so he'd been playing at that level, and just, I mean, I don't know what else you would want from a potential standpoint. Like, that is basically the definition of potential. High level ball skills, high level movement skills, no injury history, and 7'4" with a huge wingspan. Like, yeah, that's potential. Because it's not like because there are other tall players, whatever, Taco Fall and guys like that are tall, but they don't have near the ball skills, the dexterity, that he has. And so that's what separates that's what makes him more than just being somebody who's tall at 18 years old, right? Is the dexterity that he has with the ball to dribble the ball, to handle, to pivot, to create different angles. Like, he has the mobility of a much smaller player, and so that's what differentiates him from other tall players, at that age is just the movement, the dexterity, the ability to do guard like things, even if he's not, fully a guard or having the same type of quickness as, somebody, who's, whatever, 6', 6'2", but he can do a lot of the same things, which is exceptional for somebody at that age and that size.
Right. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and like you said, so height matters first and foremost. Probably, I would say it in basketball, but there's a reason there's been so many 7-footers that are not Wembanyama that have come through the league, and it's all the things you mentioned his versatility and mobility, able to play like a guard. I mean, when we're comparing him, like you said, to one of the greatest scorers and one of the greatest defenders of all time, 7'4" with an 8-foot wingspan, it's like he's just expanding on what they've already done and proven works. Only he's bigger and longer and just as mobile, if not more mobile and agile. His movements, his ability to stay healthy, which is a really underrated factor in what makes him so special. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of what else you could dream up in a creative player type of potential prospect that could exist. And when we were talking, I was thinking maybe if LeBron was 7'5" with an 8-foot wingspan, that's about the only other type of prospect that would have a chance in this conversation, I guess, to try to have that level of potential. And again, like you mentioned, he might not reach it. I mean, you see Nikola Jokic, one of the greatest scoring creators of all time, has probably reached his individual potential, I would say. But right. As a team, he might not win 5 or 6 championships in this league that's pretty competitive nowadays. It's pretty even, a lot more competitiveness top to bottom in terms of the playoffs and who wins the championship. It's not as easy to dominate just having one star, and he might be even better than he's ever been this year. And we might not see him win more than a handful of championships, where he still deserves to be in that discussion of top 20 all time. But for anyone to reach that Jordan or LeBron level or Kareem level of all-time great status, you just have to win the rings that go along with it to really give yourself a chance. And in the barbershop discussions where all these take place. So, there's just
the only I wasn't around then, but the only ones who I could think of being from a potential standpoint, in the Wemby discussion would be Wilt or Bill Russell. Just because, I mean, Bill Russell was, also a, world level high jumper, I think, and stuff like that. So they have similar, but even that, they're not 7'4", but they're, but from a potential standpoint, maybe when they were 18 years old, you could have, and at that age, at that time, but, but again, to differentiate, at University of Florida, there's the 6 foot or 7'9" kid, right? From Canada, Oliver Rowe or whatever his name is,
mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
So to me, he's not near the potential that Wemby, just because again of the movement and the ball skills. Like I haven't watched him play that much, and it's he can basically reach up and grab the rim. So from one standpoint, like that is an incredible potential player right there, just based on that size. But to me, like the ball skills and the mobility and dexterity that Wemby showed is so much higher than anything I've seen from him that to me they're not even comparable, and that's why he's unlikely and nobody's talking about him as like a first round pick or anything like that. So again, that's the difference. It's not just that he's tall, but it's what he can do with that kind of height.
Right. The idea that like he has the instincts to like block a shot or get a deflection and then grab and go, push the pace, bring the ball up himself, and then post up whoever he wants for a turnaround fadeaway on the other end. Like he's just capable of like just about anything you can imagine. And good shout out to some of the original superstars in the league. I mean, Will Chamberlain might be the greatest athlete to ever play basketball, and it was just quite a while ago. And I imagine he is even still a little bit smaller than Wemby, and maybe not have as much shooting range and more modern skills. And there's always that discussion of if you dropped him into today's game and he was the same age, maybe he would just as easily develop a lot of those ball skills and with the right type of given the same opportunity and practice habits and food and health and conditioning and all that strength conditioning that goes into the game nowadays. But that's the beauty of these all-time great discussions. It's a lot of what ifs, and we're left with what they accomplished on the court. But hey, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Brian. It was a lot of fun and super interesting to learn, just about all these different ideas, the fake fundamentals and the playmaker 3v3 and getting that live game experience is just super interesting. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. Have a good one. Good luck this season.
Thanks. Appreciate it.